A shocking event occurred near Bogota Park in Colombia on January 22, 2023. A local sanitation worker was rummaging through a dumpster when he suddenly froze in horror at what he saw at the very bottom. There lay a blue suitcase wrapped in black tape, surrounded by several trash bags. But what shocked the man the most was that a human head was sticking out from under the suitcase lid. Yes, inside the suitcase was a woman's body, there was no doubt about it. Frightened by the gruesome discovery, the worker drove a few blocks before contacting law enforcement. A group of police officers immediately rushed to the scene to verify the information received. What they saw shocked even the most experienced cops. A twisted, lifeless corpse was stuffed inside the suitcase. Later, an examination established the identity of the deceased. It turned out to be Valentina Trespalacios. During the initial examination of the body, no signs of the use of firearms or bladed weapons were found, nor any evidence of dismemberment. An interesting fact was that the murdered woman was wearing a nightgown with a belt, which led to the conclusion that the killer had attacked the victim in her sleep. By the way, the girl was identified thanks to the contents of a black cardboard box next to the suitcase. Inside Valentina's student ID, the password she used when applying for a certificate, and other documents and personal belongings were found. In my opinion, it's quite unusual that these papers weren't destroyed by the perpetrator, because usually in such cases, killers try not to leave any trace. The police contacted the victim's relatives, who confirmed that on Saturday, January 21, Valentina was in the company of her boyfriend, a US citizen. But the autopsy results painted a horrific picture. Multiple blows to the head, numerous injuries to the body, hemorrhages in the tongue, and a mysterious burn on the buttocks. Everything indicated that the cause of death was asphyxiation. The investigation now faced the task of reconstructing the events of that fatal evening in order to track down the killer and understand the motives behind this horrific crime. So far, there are more questions than answers, but I'll explain everything to you now, but only to those who subscribe to the channel right now, like this video, and write any comment so that as many people as possible see this video. Valentina Trespalacios, born in 2001, was from Bogota, Colombia. This young girl was studying at the Faculty of Commerce and International Business, but her true passion was music. From an early age, Valentina showed remarkable talent and a keen ear for music, which allowed her to start a career as a DJ in her home country after receiving a professional DJ diploma. For 3 years, Valentina actively developed as a DJ, which led to her circle of friends and acquaintances, including many foreigners. The girl often visited other countries where she gained experience and shared her own developments. During this period, she had the opportunity to perform on the same stage with famous artists and celebrities, toured more than 20 cities in Colombia, and participated in large-scale international events in her genre. Valentina managed to perform at festivals and tour Colombia, Chile, Mexico, Brazil, and Peru. Everyone around her noted that this talented girl had a great future ahead of her. Valentina's popularity was growing steadily. She was an in-demand DJ throughout the country and left her mark in the best nightclubs while doing what she loved most. According to those who knew her, Valentina was a cheerful and happy young woman who enjoyed the atmosphere of parties and gatherings. Moreover, she was active on social media, telling her subscribers about her performances on stage and keeping them informed about the events of her busy daily life. Very recently, Valentina was recognized as the best amateur DJ in Colombia in the field of electronic music, which only confirmed her growing success and popularity. However, in her social networks, the girl shared not only her professional achievements, she also talked about her romance with an American named John Poulos, whom she met online at the end of 2021. At first, despite regular communication, Valentina was in no hurry to start a serious relationship, but over time, real feelings flared up between her and John, and the young people became a couple. It would seem that nothing foreshadowed trouble in the life of this talented and successful girl, at least at first glance. What happened next was so unexpected that I almost dropped my coffee. John Poulos, an American, indeed had serious intentions regarding a shared future with Valentina. So serious that the man financed her cosmetic procedures, lip augmentation with hyaluronic acid and cheekbone correction. Moreover, Poulos even advised his beloved to get breast implants. All these radical changes in appearance that occurred over several months transformed Valentina into a real center of attention wherever she appeared. It seemed that John was truly in love. He regularly sent money to the girl and soon started thinking about marriage. Poulos intended to move to Colombia to be near Valentina and start a family. However, the girl had some doubts about this union because John showed excessive jealousy. Imagine he even hired a private detective to monitor all of Valentina's acquaintances and movements. Of course, such behavior alarmed the girl's family when she shared her concerns and this situation with them. However, in January 2023, Poulos was firmly determined to share his life with his beloved woman. He began the process of preparing documents for marriage with Valentina and rented an apartment in the north of Bogota. There, the couple planned to spend weekends until they found a permanent place to live. John arrived in the Colombian capital on Thursday, January 19th. Surveillance cameras in the building recorded him entering the apartment around 11 p.m., carrying a blue travel suitcase. By the way, the suitcase was very similar to the one in which Valentina's body was later found. An ominous coincidence, isn't it? Of course, when the gruesome discovery became known, Poulos immediately came under the sights of law enforcement. After all, he was the last person to see the girl alive. However, the detectives' attempts to contact John proved futile. All calls were forwarded to voicemail. For Valentina's relatives, Poulos had always seemed like a good person, calm and benevolent. They didn't notice any aggression in him, and his intention to marry the young woman seemed like sincere love. No one could even imagine that John could be involved in this terrible crime, but the doubts dissipated when investigators visited the building where the man was renting an apartment. Poulos disappeared in an unknown direction, only worsening his already shaky position in the eyes of the police. My friends, a very important point: the creation of such content requires a lot of time, and right now my channel and I are going through a difficult financial situation. I would be immensely grateful if you become a sponsor of this channel and support me with your donation, and in return, I will be able to personally respond to you in the comments and also mention your noble name in my video. So become sponsors, I will be eternally grateful to you. What happened next turned this case into a real thriller. The first alarming bell rang immediately after it became known about Valentina's death. Early in the morning on Monday, January 23, John Poulos deleted all his social media profiles. At that time, he was already considered the main and only suspect in this case. Proof of this was the recordings from surveillance cameras in the building, which were meticulously studied by investigators from the police and the Colombian prosecutor's office. For hours, law enforcement officers reviewed the video materials, tracking the movements of the young couple from Friday evening to Sunday morning. It was during this time that Valentina's body was thrown into a dumpster. In addition, the detectives analyzed the couple's correspondence on WhatsApp, which shed light on the last hours of the girl's life. It seemed that these messages were leading the investigation in the right direction. At first, everything went according to plan. Valentina and John agreed to meet on January 20th. But Poulos decided to fly in a day earlier and immediately check into the apartment that the couple planned to rent together. In the evening, he sent the girl a message, and that's when the first misunderstandings began. Valentina couldn't meet with her beloved because she had already promised a friend to go to a party. Moreover, she didn't expect John's early arrival at all. Poulos, in turn, began to get jealous, asking if there were other men at that party. An irritated Valentina replied that it was just his unfounded suspicions and reminded him that they had agreed to meet on the 20th. By the way, the girl planned a series of meetings before meeting her boyfriend. She needed to get ready, get eyelash extensions, and visit a hairdresser. Because of this quarrel, the couple did not see each other throughout the day on January 20th. Only in the evening did surveillance cameras record both of them arriving at the parking lot near Valentina's apartment. Around 6 p.m., John was collecting the girl's things to move to a new place and start living together. That same day, Valentina said goodbye to her family and friends and went to the address specified by Poulos by car. On the way, she called her mother via video and said that she was going home. The recording showed that John, who had rented this car to transport his beloved's belongings, was sitting next to the girl in the car. At 7 p.m., the cameras recorded the couple entering the new apartment together with Valentina's things. A few minutes later, the girl was already sending videos to her loved ones, showing the apartment and how she and John went back to the car several times to get suitcases. Finally, around 1 in the morning, already on January 21st, the surveillance recorded the couple who had finished all the hassles of moving and finally returned to their new nest. What happened next became a real test for the investigative team. Who could have thought that this would be Valentina's last night in this life? Somewhere around 3 in the morning, after a few hours of settling into the new apartment and resting, Valentina and John decided to have some fun and called a taxi to a nightclub in the south of Bogota. The girl had previously arranged for a small presentation at this establishment, so she was supposed to perform there as a guest DJ. The young couple arrived at their destination around 4 in the morning. Valentina immediately took her place at the DJ booth, and her partner stayed by her side the entire time, watching his beloved work. Around 5 in the morning, Valentina's fiery set came to an end, and the couple, holding hands, headed to the club's office space. It was there that they met with the owner of the establishment, his wife, and her close friend. What exactly the young people talked about with this company is not known for certain, but it's quite possible that some details from that conversation could shed light on the horrific events that unfolded later. Anyway, by 6 in the morning, Valentina and John left the club. None of those present could have thought that they were seeing the girl alive for the last time. However, later that same day, Trespalacios did remind them of herself, and at that moment it seemed that she was fine. On that Saturday, she called one of her closest friends and said that she didn't plan to go out anywhere else. She said that most likely she would just stay in the apartment with her boyfriend. Unless perhaps, later they would go out together for a short dinner somewhere nearby or cook something themselves. At least those were her intentions at the time. The girl had no idea what a tragic turn awaited her very soon. If only she had been a little more careful and listened to her family's wariness about John's strange and sometimes jealous behavior. However, at that moment nothing foreshadowed trouble, and Valentina sincerely believed in a happy future with her beloved. Oh, if only it were possible to turn back time and change the course of events. Perhaps now this incredibly talented girl would be alive and continue to share her creativity with the world. But you can't deceive fate, and unfortunately, it measures out much less for some than we would like. The further development of events came as a real shock to everyone present at the court hearing. Valentina's last video call took place at 9 o'clock in the evening, and her closest friend was on the other end. However, as the girl's mother, Laura Hidalgo, recalled, the last person to see Valentina alive during a video call was her younger son, a 13-year-old teenager. He said that at that moment his sister was lying in bed next to her boyfriend John, and the couple looked very happy and carefree. After that conversation, no one from the family contacted Valentina again. At 10:43 p.m. on January 21st, surveillance cameras in the building recorded the young woman in the company of her chosen one for the last time. The footage shows the girl peeking out of the apartment door, with John standing in front of the entrance. The man has a pensive and somewhat agitated look. He nervously paces back and forth down the corridor, occasionally rubbing his face with his palms. At some point, Poulos calls the elevator and goes down, probably to pick up some delivery. The next day, on Sunday, January 22nd at 9 a.m., the same cameras again noticed John. This time he was leaving the apartment holding 2 large bags of garbage in his hands. But for some reason, Valentina was nowhere to be seen. Poulos headed to the parking lot, opened a silver car, and put the bags in the back seat. Then he returned to the apartment and a few minutes later came out of there with 2 suitcases, which he also loaded into the trunk. Having done this, he went back upstairs again. The clock showed 10 in the morning when John once again left the apartment. Now he had a huge suitcase covered with a grey blanket in his hands. He placed it on a delivery cart. Next to it was another separate bag. At that time, no one knew that under the blanket was actually Valentina's body, with her head sticking out of the suitcase. Once in the parking lot, Poulos began to look around, as if checking if there were any witnesses nearby. After making sure that there was no one around, he took a few steps forward and looked again to make sure that no one was coming down in the elevator. Then the man quickly returned to the car. After looking around one last time and taking a few sips of water from a bottle, John, with great effort, lifted the heavy suitcase and almost threw it into the trunk. The bag followed. After closing the compartment, Poulos got behind the wheel and quickly drove away. Could anyone have imagined what a horrifying cargo that man was transporting? Hardly, but facts are stubborn things, and all these disturbing events captured by surveillance cameras later became key evidence in the investigation of the brutal murder of a talented girl. How many questions her relatives, friends, and acquaintances had, and the main one among them was why. For what reason did someone so mercilessly cut short Valentina's life, who was just beginning to flourish and conquer new heights? Believe me, the answer to this question shocked even the most experienced investigators. Throughout the day, around noon, the suspect's car was repeatedly caught on surveillance cameras at various points in Bogota. It seemed that the man was looking for a suitable place to get rid of the suitcase with its terrible contents. At about 3:00 p.m., a silver sedan drove into the territory of one of the city parks and stopped near the garbage cans. At this moment, the driver got out of the car and headed towards the dumpster. He nervously looked around, as if checking if anyone had noticed him. After making sure that there were no witnesses nearby, the man took a suitcase out of the trunk, which, judging by his efforts, was quite heavy. Lifting the suitcase, he quickly approached the bin and threw it inside. Then he returned to the car and pulled out a bag from there, which he also got rid of by throwing it into the dumpster. Having dealt with this, the stranger latched the lid of the container and hastily walked away. The further out of the car lay in a western direction, and the final destination turned out to be the international airport of El Dorado. It was there at 4:30 p.m. that John Poulos was last seen by surveillance cameras. After that, his trail was lost, at least for a while. The next day, on Monday, January 23rd, the Colombian Ministry of Security announced a $1 million reward for any information that would help find the person or persons involved in the murder of Valentina Trespalacios. At the same time, the Colombian law enforcement agencies officially appealed to Interpol with a request to put Poulos on the international wanted list. And there were good reasons for this. John suddenly fled the country without explaining the reasons for such an act, and he was also the last person to contact the girl on the night of her disappearance. And then, on the evening of January 24th, encouraging news came from Panamanian colleagues. That day, the National Police of Panama reported that they had managed to detain Poulos at the Tocumen International Airport. The suspect was trying to board a flight to Turkey, but was apprehended by law enforcement. The Colombian authorities immediately began the process of extraditing John in order to interrogate him and get answers about Valentina's death. More than 14 experienced specialists in the field of forensic science and operational search activities joined the investigation of this high-profile case. Thanks to the coordinated work under the coordination of the Prosecutor General's Office of Colombia, more than 300 hours of video recordings were sifted through and thoroughly analyzed. All these materials were collected during the intense search and collection of evidence. It would seem that the noose around the suspect had finally tightened. However, there was still a lot of work ahead for the investigators. After all, it was not enough to simply detain the alleged killer. It was necessary to gather irrefutable evidence of his guilt and establish a motive for committing this horrific crime. And something told the detectives that the answers to these questions might turn out to be much more terrifying than they expected. During the investigation of this intricate case, another important clue unexpectedly appeared. The closest friend of the deceased Valentina, who lived in Cartagena, came to Bogota to give investigators her laptop. The fact is that on the day of the murder, Valentina used it and forgot to close her WhatsApp account. So all the girls' chats and correspondence remained accessible. And among these messages, the friend noticed something extremely suspicious and creepy. The woman told the detectives that she saw photos in Valentina's correspondence that Poulos had sent her on the day he arrived in Bogota. In the pictures, the man posed next to his luggage, and here the friend's attention was drawn to one detail: the suitcase that John was carrying with him was very similar to the one in which Valentina's body was later found. Even the color matched. Of course, it was unclear to the investigators why the young woman left her WhatsApp open on her friend's computer. But anyway, these messages and photos became a real find for the police. Thanks to them, law enforcement officers were able to better reconstruct the chronology of events on that fatal day and confirm important details. And these pieces of evidence also became another nail in the coffin of the suspect, John Poulos. Meanwhile, experts completed a forensic medical examination of Valentina's body. Its results shocked even experienced criminalists. It turned out that the cause of the girl's death was mechanical asphyxia. In simple terms, Valentina was strangled by tightly tightening a rope around her neck. Traces of violence inflicted before death were also found on the body. Forensic experts concluded that everything indicated that Valentina was killed in her sleep. This was particularly evidenced by the fact that the girl was wearing night pajamas. It's hard to even imagine what this young woman had to go through in the last minutes of her life. Well, let's summarize all these facts and circumstances. The evidence gathered by the investigation unequivocally pointed to the involvement of one particular man in this horrific crime, John Poulos. Firstly, he flew to Bogota on the same day that Valentina was last seen alive. Secondly, in the couple's correspondence shortly before the murder, the same suitcase appeared in which the girl's mutilated body was later found. Thirdly, John was the last person to contact Valentina before her disappearance. And his strange behavior after the incident, escape from the country, and attempts to cover his tracks only intensified the detectives' suspicions. However, for a complete picture, several key elements were still missing. Investigators understood that they needed to learn more about the suspect's personality, his possible motives and psychological profile. And it was also necessary to explain some unclear details, such as Valentina's mysterious message to the taxi driver. The further development of events exceeded our wildest assumptions. When the suspect John Poulos was officially charged, he did not plead guilty to the intentional murder of Valentina with aggravating circumstances and concealing evidence. Instead, he began to claim that during his detention in Panama, law enforcement officers made procedural violations as they did not provide him with the opportunity to talk to a lawyer. Quite a cunning position, isn't it? The court hearing in this case lasted more than 5 hours. Poulos even had to be provided with an interpreter, as his knowledge of Spanish was extremely limited. And yet, despite attempts to deny his guilt, John Poulos remained the main suspect in this terrible crime. All the evidence pointed to his involvement. Firstly, he was the last person to see Valentina alive. Secondly, immediately after her disappearance, Poulos tried to flee the country, deleting all his social media profiles. Why? Perhaps he hoped to get rid of traces and avoid responsibility in this way. By the way, it turned out that John Nelson Poulos, born in 1987, was originally from Wisconsin, USA. In his homeland, he had already been married and had 3 children. However, the marriage ended in divorce. Moreover, Poulos' ex-wife even obtained a court restraining order against him related to domestic violence. Well, it seems that the suspect's strange behavior and propensity for cruelty have long-standing roots. Another telling detail: another woman with whom Poulos corresponded online and even sent money told the investigation interesting things. According to her, John spent about 5-6 hours a day browsing adult sites. She also noted that in communication he behaved unpredictably. Sometimes he pretended to be a gentleman and then suddenly turned into a completely different personality. And he also loved to fantasize about strange topics. By the way, another girl from an online models page who was familiar with Poulos added an illustrative testimony. Once she stopped responding to John's messages after he made a creepy remark, mentioning jealousy and murder. Literally, it sounded like this: "If you were in a bar and I came there, would you talk to me?" The girl refused him, to which Poulos replied something like that was a sufficient reason for murder out of jealousy. The witness emphasized, although John sent her money, signing as a magic lord, she never communicated with him via video call. However, even correspondence with Poulos was full of oddities. John had a clear behavioral pattern in his relationships with victims. With Valentina, he also met online and then began to persistently send her money and gifts. In this way, Poulos created the illusion of a bought right of ownership and tried to make the girl dependent on him. Unfortunately, women often do not notice these alarming signs. After all, at first, such attention may seem pleasant, especially for trusting victims. But predators like Poulos act exactly like this. First, they win over with money and attention, and then begin to treat their partner as an object. However, this time the criminal made a fatal mistake, and the law finally caught up with him. By the way, the investigation put forward an interesting version regarding Poulos' motives. It seems that John was convinced that the garbage disposal system in Colombia works the same way as in the USA. They say that waste is simply collected in containers and then taken somewhere to a landfill. However, Poulos did not take into account the local realities because in Colombia, the poor and homeless often visit garbage dumps in search of things that can be sold or used. So all of John's plans to hide the body in a suitcase among the waste failed miserably. Currently, the suspect is being held in a solitary confinement cell in the capital's prison in Bogota. The prosecutor's office continues to gather evidence of his guilt and is looking for additional details that will help to fully reconstruct the picture of this horrific crime. Of course, there is still a lot of work ahead. After all, it is necessary not only to prove Poulos' guilt, but also to find out what exactly pushed him to this terrible act. By the way, Colombian law provides for up to 50 years in prison for premeditated murder. This is the punishment that John Poulos may receive if his guilt is proven. For their part, law enforcement officers are making every effort to achieve justice. A special group formed by the capital's police under the leadership of the Prosecutor General's office is carefully working on the search and systematization of evidence. After all, now that the main suspect is behind bars, they have a huge responsibility to do everything so that he can never harm any woman again. This story is a vivid example of the risks that can be hidden behind new acquaintances on the internet. Unfortunately, many people like Valentina do not initially notice the alarming signs and sincerely believe that they have found a kindred spirit and the love of their life. Few people think that something bad can happen to them. However, experience eloquently proves the opposite to us, so be vigilant and careful when trusting little-known people. After all, sometimes a real monster can hide behind the mask of a prince. This is where our meeting comes to an end. However, if you are interested in this horrifying story, be sure to find time to watch other documentary episodes as well. I'm sure they will not leave you indifferent and will make you think about the value of human life. So until new meetings, dear viewers, and take care of yourself and your loved ones.